The morning my Uncle Roland served me an eviction notice in front of 20 neighbors, calling me a freeloader just like my dead mother, I thought my life was over. But when that black Mercedes pulled up and a lawyer stepped out with a manila folder that made my uncle's face turn white, that's when I learned my mother had been playing a 20-year-long game. My name is Francine Moretti, and I'm about to tell you how my own uncle tried to destroy my life in front of my 8-year-old twins, only to discover he'd been standing on someone else's ground the entire time. This isn't just a story about family betrayal. This is about a mother's love that reached from beyond the grave to protect her daughter when she needed it most. Picture this: October morning, crisp air, the kind where you need a light jacket but the sun promises warmth later. I'm standing in my doorway in my dental scrubs, my twins Colby and Josie beside me in their school uniforms, and there's my Uncle Roland in his $1,000 Navy suit, holding a pink eviction notice like he's serving a warrant. Behind him, our building supervisor, Mr. Yates, can't even look at me. Below us in the courtyard, half our apartment complex has gathered, phones out, recording everything. "You're a freeloader just like your mother was," Uncle Roland announces, his voice carrying across the courtyard like he's giving a public service announcement. Always expecting handouts, never taking responsibility. My 8-year-old daughter Josie starts crying, pressing her face into my scrub top. Her twin brother Colby steps forward, all 4 feet of him, fists clenched like he's ready to defend his mom against a man who used to give him birthday presents. The neighbors are whispering. Mrs. Gutierrez from 2C has her phone up, live streaming to her Facebook. Mr. Patterson from 3A shakes his head in disgust. These people have watched me leave for work at 6 in the morning, seen me come home exhausted after cleaning teeth all day, witnessed me hauling groceries up 4 flights when the elevator broke. They know I'm no freeloader. But Uncle Roland doesn't care about truth. He cares about power. And for exactly 43 seconds that morning, he thought he had all of it. Then that black Mercedes pulled up. A woman stepped out, designer briefcase in hand, wearing the kind of suit that whispered money and authority. She walked through that crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea, her heels clicking on concrete with the rhythm of inevitability. When she spoke, her voice cut through the morning air like a blade through silk. "Roland Hutchins. I'm Desiree Blackstone, attorney for the Pauline Hutchins Moretti estate, and representing Ms. Francine Moretti, the legal owner of this building." The pink eviction notice in Uncle Roland's hand started trembling. His face went from smug satisfaction to confused panic in about 2 seconds flat. And me? I stood there holding my crying children, wondering if my mother, gone, 18 months now, had somehow just entered the chat. You see, Uncle Roland thought he was the smart one in the family, the successful one, the one with property and power and the ability to make his sister's daughter homeless with a piece of paper. But my mother, Pauline, the woman he'd called a dreamer, a failure, a nobody who died with nothing but debt. She'd been playing chess while he was playing checkers, and she'd made her final move before she even got sick. What Uncle Roland didn't know, what nobody knew except that lawyer standing in our courtyard, was that every single rent check he'd collected, every lease he'd signed, every dollar he'd made from that building over the past 15 years had been made on land he never owned. Land that belonged to my mother. Land that now belonged to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how we got to that moment, to understand why my uncle's hands were shaking, and why that lawyer's briefcase held documents that would change everything, you need to know about the Hutchins family. You need to know about 2 siblings who inherited their parents' estate 20 years ago, and how one piece of paper nobody bothered to read carefully became a ticking time bomb that would explode in a courtyard full of recording phones. You need to know about my mother, Pauline Hutchins Moretti, who everyone thought died broke and beaten down by life, but who actually orchestrated the longest, most patient, most devastating checkmate in family history. And you need to know about me, Francine, single mom, dental hygienist, the woman everyone saw struggling to make ends meet, who was about to discover that her mother had left her more than memories and old photographs. She'd left her an empire built on patience, paperwork, and the absolute certainty that Roland would eventually show his true colors. This is that story, the story of how I went from being served an eviction notice to owning the entire building, The story of how my dead mother's worthless paperwork turned out to be worth $3 million. The story of how the word freeloader echoed through a courtyard and came back as landlord. My name is Francine Moretti. I'm 34 years old. I have 2 kids who still believe in justice and a mother who made sure they'd get to see it served. And this is how I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or immediate or violent. Sometimes it's a quiet woman with cancer who spends her last months setting a trap that would spring long after her funeral, ensuring her daughter would never be helpless again. Uncle Roland called me a freeloader that October morning. 20 minutes later, he found out he'd been the one living free on someone else's land all along. I'd been living in Unit 4B of the Riverside Gardens apartment complex for 3 years, and every morning felt like a small victory. The apartment wasn't fancy, but it had 2 bedrooms, windows that actually opened, and water, pressure that could rinse shampoo out of your hair in under 5 minutes. For a single mom with twins, that was luxury enough. My Uncle Roland owned the building, or at least that's what everyone believed. After my mother, Pauline, passed away from pancreatic cancer 18 months ago, he'd approached me at her funeral with what seemed like genuine kindness. The church basement smelled like coffee and casseroles, and my twins were clinging to my black dress with their small, confused hands when he pulled me aside. "Family takes care of family, Franny," he'd said, his large hand heavy on my shoulder. His breath smelled like the peppermints he always carried. "Your mother would want me to look after you girls. I've got a unit opening up in Riverside Gardens, 2 bedrooms, good school district, and I'll give it to you for the family rate, $800 instead of $1,400. I'd almost cried with relief. My ex-husband Drake had vanished to Arizona 6 months earlier with his 23-year-old fitness instructor girlfriend, leaving me with 2 kids, a pile of credit card debt he'd racked up, and child support payments that existed only in theory. I was making decent money as a dental hygienist at Dr. Henley's practice, but decent money doesn't stretch far when you're covering daycare, groceries, and all the mysterious fees that come with raising twins. "Thank you, Uncle Roland," I'd said, meaning it. "Thank you so much." He'd patted my shoulder the way you'd pat a dog who'd finally learned to sit. "Just keep the rent coming on time, and we'll get along fine." The apartment had been a godsend. It was close enough to Lincoln Elementary that I could walk the twins to school before catching the bus to work. The building was mostly filled with elderly residents who treated Colby and Josie like honorary grandchildren. Mrs. Gutierrez taught Josie to crochet. Mr. Patterson helped Colby with his math homework. Miss Chen from 5B kept accidentally making too much food and bringing us plates of dumplings and noodles. Our unit faced the courtyard where someone had planted roses years ago. Every spring they bloomed in defiant red bursts, and Josie would beg me to cut just one for her room. I always said no because they belonged to everyone, but she'd stand at our window and watch them anyway, making up stories about fairy kingdoms hidden in the petals. The relationship between Uncle Roland and my mother had always been complicated, like a rope with too many knots to ever fully untangle. Growing up, I'd watch them argue at every family gathering. He was older by 5 years and never let her forget it. When their parents died in a car accident 20 years ago, the will divided everything between them. Roland got the hardware store on Maple Street. Mom got what he called a bunch of old papers and sentimental garbage. Pauline lives in Fantasyland, he'd tell anyone at family barbecues, usually after his 3rd beer. She got boxes of documents and worthless bonds while I got an actual business. But that's Pauline for you. Always dreaming about getting rich quick while I'm out here actually working. Mom would just smile and change the subject, but I saw how her jaw tightened, how her fingers would drum against her thigh in that pattern she did when she was holding words inside. She worked as a bookkeeper for 3 different small businesses, keeping their numbers straight and their taxes clean. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 2. She never complained, never asked Roland for help, never gave him the satisfaction of seeing her struggle. "Your uncle means well," she'd tell me when I was younger and angry on her behalf. "He just sees the world in very simple terms, assets and debits, winners and losers. Someday he'll learn that life is more complicated than that." The twins and I had made that apartment our own little kingdom. Colby had covered his side of the bedroom with dinosaur posters from the dollar store. Josie had strung fairy lights around her bed that I'd found at a garage sale. We had a tiny balcony where we grew tomatoes in old paint buckets I'd gotten from the maintenance room. The tomatoes usually came out lopsided and strange, but the kids would eat them in salads and declare them the best tomatoes in the world. Every Sunday, we had pancake breakfast at our small kitchen table. I'd bought it from Goodwill and spent a weekend sanding and repainting it white. The chairs didn't match, but nobody cared. Colby would always make smiley faces with his chocolate chips. Josie would insist on helping flip the pancakes, usually sending batter splattering across the stove. Those Sunday mornings made every long shift cleaning teeth worth it. I'd been keeping up with rent, paying Uncle Roland directly each month. He insisted on cash or check made out to him personally, not the building's management company. Easier for taxes, he'd said, and I hadn't questioned it. I needed that family discount more than I needed to understand his accounting methods. Every month, I'd hand him the check, he'd give me a receipt, and we'd pretend we were just tenant and landlord, not family with decades of complicated history between us. Life wasn't easy, but it was working. The kids were happy and healthy. I had a job and a home and neighbors who cared about us. We were making it work, one day at a time, one small victory at a time. I had no idea that Uncle Roland was about to try to tear it all down. I had no idea that my mother had seen it coming years ago and planned accordingly. I had no idea that the worthless papers she'd inherited were actually the foundation of everything Roland had built. But I was about to find out. Everything changed on a Thursday morning in October. The day started wrong from the beginning. My alarm didn't go off. Josie spilled orange juice all over her school uniform, and Colby couldn't find his library book anywhere. I was rushing around in my dental scrubs, making sandwiches with one hand and signing permission slips with the other when Dr. Henley called. "Francine, I need you here by 7:30, he said. "Mrs. Morrison needs an emergency root canal and she only trusts you to assist." I looked at the clock. 7:10. "I'll be there," I promised, shoving the sandwiches into brown bags. The doorbell rang just as I was grabbing my purse. Through the peephole, I saw Uncle Roland in his expensive navy suit, the one he wore to intimidate people. Mr. Yates stood beside him, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact with the peephole, like he knew I was watching. I opened the door, already apologizing. "Uncle Roland, I'm running late. Can we talk tonight?" "This won't take long," he said, but his voice was different, louder, performance level loud. That's when I noticed the courtyard below was filling with people. Mrs. Gutierrez was there with her phone out. Mr. Patterson had stopped his morning walk. Even the teenage Rodriguez brothers, who usually slept until noon, were standing by the fountain, watching. "Francine!" Uncle Roland boomed, and I mean boomed, like he was announcing a boxing match. "I'm serving you with a 30-day eviction notice." The words hit me like ice water. "What? Uncle Roland, what are you talking about?" He held up a pink paper, waving it so everyone below could see. "You're 2 months behind on rent. I've been patient because you're family, but I'm not running a charity here." "That's a lie." The words burst out of me. "I gave you the checks personally, last month at your office. This month I handed it to you in the parking lot. You gave me receipts." "I have no record of any payments," he said, his voice still carrying across the courtyard like he wanted everyone to hear. "You're a freeloader, just like your mother was, always expecting handouts, never taking responsibility." Josie started crying immediately, that hiccuping sob 8-year-olds do when they're scared and confused. She grabbed my scrub top, burying her face in my side. "Mommy, what's happening? What's wrong?" Colby moved in front of us like a tiny bodyguard, his dinosaur backpack still on his shoulders. "Why are you being mean to my mom?" he demanded, looking up at Uncle Roland with eyes that were starting to fill with tears. "I'm not being mean, young man," Uncle Roland said, still in that carrying voice. "I'm being a businessman. Your mother needs to learn that life has consequences." More phones were out now. I could see them raised like little black rectangles, recording everything. Someone from the 3rd floor was leaning over their balcony with what looked like an actual camera. My humiliation was being documented in high definition. "The rent checks," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have the carbon copies at home. They were cashed, Uncle Roland. I can prove it. I saw them on my bank statement." "Then you can prove it to a judge," he said coldly. He turned to Mr. Yates. "You're my witness that this was served properly." Mr. Yates nodded miserably, still not meeting my eyes. He'd fixed our garbage disposal last month, had coffee at my kitchen table while telling me about his new grandbaby. But Uncle Roland, I tried again. Where am I supposed to go? The kids, their school, my job. Not my problem anymore, he interrupted. The building's been sold. Crimson Property Holdings takes possession in 30 days, and they want all non-paying tenants out. Clean slate. Sold? The word came out as barely a whisper. You sold the building without telling anyone? I don't owe tenants explanations about my business decisions, he said, especially tenants who don't pay rent. Mrs. Gutierrez called out from below. This isn't right, Roland. That girl works 6 days a week. He ignored her, pressing the pink notice into my hands. The paper felt wrong, too heavy, like it was made of all my fears condensed into one rectangular sheet. 30 days, Francine, he said, and don't bother calling me uncle anymore. Family privileges are revoked. Maybe this will teach you to be more like me and less like Pauline. She died with nothing but debt and broken dreams, and you're headed the same way. The crowd below had grown. I could hear their murmurs, some sympathetic, some shocked. Someone said, "That's his own niece?" Another voice said, "Those poor babies." Colby was crying now too, trying not to but failing, his little shoulders shaking. We don't have to leave, do we, Mom? This is our home. Uncle Roland turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back. You know what your problem is, Francine? You're too soft, too trusting, just like your mother. She never understood that business is business. Family is just a word people use when they want something for free. My mother was worth 10 of you, I said quietly, but he was already walking down the stairs. The crowd parted for him. Nobody said anything directly to him, but I could see the disgust on their faces. Mrs. Chen actually turned her back on him. The Rodriguez brothers looked like they wanted to follow him, and not for good reasons. Mr. Yates lingered for a moment. I'm sorry, Francine, he said quietly. He made me come, said he'd fire me if I didn't witness it. I got grandkids to feed. I understand, I told him, even though understanding and forgiving were two different things. After they left, I stood in my doorway for a moment, holding my crying children, feeling the eyes of the entire building on us. The pink notice in my hand might as well have been a neon sign reading, "Failure." Mrs. Gutierrez was the first to climb the stairs. Don't you worry, mija, she said firmly. We all know you pay your rent. We know what kind of man your uncle is. This isn't over. But standing there with my kids crying, my job waiting, and an eviction notice in my hand, it felt like everything was over. I had no idea that my mother had left. Me one last gift. I had no idea that Uncle Roland had just made the biggest mistake of his life. All I knew was that I had 30 days to figure out how to save my children's home. And I was going to fight with everything I had. The crowd slowly dispersed, but I knew the video was already spreading. By lunch, everyone in the building would have seen it. By dinner, it would probably be on social media. My uncle hadn't just evicted me. He'd done it in the most public, humiliating way possible. What he didn't know was that he'd also created witnesses. Lots of them. All with phones, all with recordings. And that was going to matter more than any of us realized. That evening, after the twins cried themselves to sleep, I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by boxes. Not packing boxes, but my mother's boxes. The ones Uncle Roland had dropped off after her funeral with a dismissive comment about Pauline's junk. I'd stored them in my closet, unable to face sorting through them, but now I needed answers. Mom had been meticulous about keeping records. Every receipt, every document, every piece of paper that seemed remotely important went into labeled folders in waterproof containers. Document everything, Franny, she used to say while filing papers in our old apartment. Paper trails don't lie. People do, and someday you might need proof of the truth. I started with the box labeled Finances, but found only old tax returns and bank statements from the 1990s. The second box, Medical, held records from her cancer treatments that made my chest tight with grief. But the third box, labeled Insurance, felt different the moment I opened it. There were no insurance papers inside. Instead, I found legal documents with the Riverside Gardens address. Property deeds with raised seals, transfer agreements written in dense legal language, a land survey from 1968, and at the bottom, a manila envelope with my name written in Mom's careful handwriting. For Francine, open only in emergency. Inside the envelope was a business card. Desiree Blackstone, estate attorney, with a phone number and a note in Mom's handwriting. Call only if Roland betrays you. She has everything else you'll need. My hands shook as I read through the property documents. The language was complex, but one thing became clear. The land beneath Riverside Gardens was held by something called PM Holdings, LLC. The building itself was owned by Roland Hutchins, two separate entities, two separate ownership structures. I looked at the clock. 10:15 p.m. Too late to call a lawyer, but I dialed anyway, expecting voicemail. A crisp voice answered immediately. Ms. Moretti, I've been expecting your call for 18 months. You have? I gripped the phone tighter. Who are you? How do you know me? I represent your mother's estate. She retained me 3 years ago when her diagnosis became terminal. I have a complete file waiting for you. Can you meet tomorrow morning? 8. Sharp? Bring those documents you just found and any eviction papers your uncle served. How did you know I found documents? I asked, thoroughly spooked now. Because your mother said you would only call me after you'd gone through her boxes, and you would only go through her boxes if Roland finally showed his true colors. Your mother knew people, Ms. Moretti, especially her brother. Oh, and Francine? Start recording everything. Every interaction with your uncle, every conversation about the building. Your mother was quite specific about that. The next morning, I dropped the twins at school early and took 3 buses to reach Ms. Blackstone's downtown office. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place where you felt underdressed no matter what you wore. My best blazer suddenly felt like it came from exactly where it came from, which was goodwill. Ms. Blackstone's office was on the 14th floor. She was a striking black woman in her 50s, with silver streaks through her natural hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in seconds. Her handshake was firm, her smile warm but professional. Your mother was brilliant, she said, spreading papers across her mahogany desk. Absolutely brilliant. Would you like some coffee? You're going to need it. I accepted the coffee, served in actual china, not a paper cup in sight. Everyone thought Mom was naive, a dreamer, Uncle Roland especially. That's exactly what she wanted him to think, Ms. Blackstone said, pulling out a file 3 inches thick. 20 years ago, when your grandparents died, the will split everything between Roland and Pauline. Roland thought he got the valuable asset, the hardware store. But Pauline received something interesting, a shell company that owned a single asset. What asset? I leaned forward, the coffee forgotten. The land under Riverside Gardens. Not the building. Roland built that himself. But the land? That's been your mother's all along. She's been letting him operate under a land lease agreement he never bothered to read carefully. She showed me the agreement, pointing to specific clauses with a gold pen. See this. The lease was for 20 years, with automatic renewal unless the landowner provided written notice of termination. The lease rate? $1 per year, paid annually. $1? I couldn't believe it. Why would Mom agree to that? Because she was playing a long game. Look at this clause here. Ms. Blackstone pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. Upon the death of the landowner, the lease automatically terminates unless renewed in writing by the heir within 18 months. If not renewed, all structures on the land become property of the landowner's estate. My coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. Mom's been dead for 18 months. 18 months and 6 days, to be exact. The deadline for renewal passed last week. Your uncle never renewed because he never knew he needed to. The building, all 24 units, every brick and board, now belongs to you. The room spun slightly. I own the building? The entire building? You own the building. Roland's been collecting rent from 24 units for the past 18 months that legally belongs to you. That's approximately $432,000, given the average rent of the units. Plus, selling to Crimson Property Holdings? He can't sell what he doesn't own. That's fraud. He's been pocketing my rent checks, I said, the pieces clicking together. Claiming I didn't pay while actually cashing them. He was trying to evict me from my own building. Your mother predicted this would happen. Ms. Blackstone said, pulling out another document. She left very specific instructions. She knew Roland would eventually try to hurt you, and she wanted to make sure that when he did, you'd have everything you needed to fight back. She handed me a letter in my mother's handwriting. I recognized her neat script immediately. My dearest Franny, if you're reading this with Ms. Blackstone, then Roland has done exactly what I knew he would. I'm sorry you're hurting, but don't be afraid. I've spent 3 years setting this up. Roland never reads contracts, never questions agreements if they seem to benefit him. He assumed the land lease would continue forever. He assumed wrong. Everything I did was to protect you and the twins. The building is yours. The law is on your side, and Ms. Blackstone has all the ammunition you need. Be strong, my love. Mom. I wiped tears from my cheeks. What do we do now? Ms. Blackstone smiled, and it was the smile of someone about to enjoy their job very much. Now we prepare to serve your uncle with papers of our own, but we're going to do it properly, publicly, with witnesses. He humiliated you in front of your neighbors. It's only fair he learns the truth the same way. When? I asked. He mentioned Crimson Property Holdings takes possession in 30 days. I think we should meet him when he comes to finalize that sale, with Mr. Crawford from Crimson present. In fact, let me call Crimson right now and let them know there's a small issue with their purchase. As she reached for her phone, I thought about my mother, quiet, hard-working Pauline, who everyone underestimated, who spent her last years setting up the most elaborate trap while dying of cancer, who knew her brother's greed would eventually turn on his niece and prepared accordingly. Ms. Blackstone, I said, when we confront him, I want to do it in the courtyard, where everyone can see, where everyone can record. She looked up from her phone and grinned. Your mother said you'd say exactly that. She really did know you both, didn't she? 3 days later, at 9 a.m. sharp, Uncle Roland arrived at Riverside Gardens with an entourage. I watched from my window as his silver Lexus pulled into the courtyard, followed by a white BMW that belonged to Mr. Crawford from Crimson Property Holdings. They'd scheduled this meeting to finalize the eviction details and hand over the building specifications to the new owners. Word had spread through the building like wildfire. Mrs. Gutierrez had sent a group text at 8:45. Meeting in courtyard at 9. Francine vs. Roland round 2. Don't miss this. By the time Uncle Roland stepped out of his car, adjusting his red power tie, nearly every tenant was positioned strategically around the courtyard. Some leaned over balconies. Others sat on the benches by the fountain. Everyone had their phones ready. I stood in my doorway wearing my best professional outfit, the black pantsuit I'd bought for Mom's funeral. The twins were at school, thank God. They didn't need to see this, though I knew they'd hear about it later from every kid whose parent was currently holding up a phone. Francine, Uncle Roland called out, his voice dripping with false concern. I hope you've started packing. Mr. Crawford here wanted to do a walkthrough of your unit since you'll be vacating soon. Mr. Crawford, a thin man in his 40s with prematurely gray hair, looked uncomfortable with the situation but nodded professionally. We like to document the condition of units before tenant removal, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't enjoying this. Actually, I said, stepping out onto the landing where everyone could see me clearly, I haven't packed a single thing. Uncle Roland's face flushed red. Then you're making this harder than it needs to be. Mr. Yates will have maintenance remove your belongings and put them in storage. The cost will be added to what you already owe. What I owe? I laughed, and it must have sounded strange because several people looked up sharply. That's interesting, Uncle Roland. Tell me, what exactly do I owe you? 2 months' rent plus late fees, he said loudly, playing to his audience again, as I explained 3 days ago when I served you proper notice. That's when the black Mercedes pulled up. The car moved slowly through the courtyard entrance, elegant and ominous, like a shark gliding through water. Every head turned to watch it park. The driver's door opened, and Ms. Desiree Blackstone stepped out, carrying her leather briefcase like a weapon. She was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, her hair pulled back in a way that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and sharper intelligence. Her heels clicked against the concrete in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Roland Hutchins, she called out, though she knew exactly who he was. Uncle Roland turned, irritated at the interruption. Yes, we're in the middle of something here. Yes, you are, Ms. Blackstone agreed, climbing the stairs to where we stood. You're in the middle of committing fraud, theft, and felony conversion of property. I'm Desiree Blackstone, attorney for the Pauline Hutchins Moretti estate and representing Miss Francine Moretti, the legal owner of this building. The color drained from Uncle Roland's face so fast I thought he might faint. What? That's impossible. Ms. Blackstone opened her briefcase with theatrical precision, pulling out a thick folder. Mr. Hutchins, are you familiar with PM Holdings, LLC? Never heard of it, he said, but his voice wavered. Interesting, since you've been paying them $1 per year for the past 20 years to lease this land. She held up a canceled check. This is your signature, is it not? Mr. Crawford stepped forward. Excuse me, what's going on here? Roland, you said you owned this property free and clear. I do, Uncle Roland insisted. I built this building. I have all the construction permits, the bank loans, everything. Yes, you built the building, Ms. Blackstone agreed. On land you didn't own, land that belonged to PM Holdings, LLC. PM stands for Pauline Moretti, Mr. Hutchins, your sister. The one you just called a woman who died with nothing but debt and broken dreams. The crowd had pressed closer. I could hear the whispers rippling through them like wind through leaves. Mrs. Gutierrez was live streaming on Facebook. The Rodriguez brothers were recording on Instagram. Mr. Patterson had his phone held high, capturing everything. This is ridiculous, Uncle Roland sputtered. Even if Pauline owned some shell company, I've been paying the lease. I have rights. Had rights, Ms. Blackstone corrected. Your lease agreement, which I doubt you've read in 20 years, contained a very specific termination clause. Upon the death of the landowner, the lease terminates automatically unless renewed in writing by the heir within 18 months. Pauline Moretti died 18 months and 6 days ago. You never requested renewal. The lease is terminated. She pulled out another document. Furthermore, according to paragraph 16, subsection C, upon lease termination, all structures and improvements on the land become property of the landowner's estate. In simple terms, Mr. Hutchins, the building you constructed now belongs entirely to Ms. Francine Moretti. Uncle Roland's hands were shaking now, the confident businessman facade cracking like cheap plaster. You can't do this. I'll sue. This is entrapment. Entrapment? Ms. Blackstone's eyebrow arched. You mean like falsely claiming your niece didn't pay rent when you were cashing her checks? We have the bank records, Mr. Hutchins. Every check Ms. Moretti wrote to you was deposited into your personal account, not the building's business account. That's embezzlement. She turned to Mr. Crawford. I've already contacted Crimson Property Holdings legal department. They're aware that Mr. Hutchins attempted to sell property he doesn't own. I believe they'll be pursuing criminal fraud charges. Mr. Crawford's face went from confused to furious. Roland, you told me you'd owned this building for 15 years. I have, Roland insisted, desperately. I've been managing it, collecting rents, maintaining it. On someone else's land, I said, finding my voice. Everyone turned to look at me. You've been collecting rents that belong to me for 18 months. $432,000, give or take. You tried to evict me from my own building while stealing my rent money. The crowd gasped collectively. Someone said, "Oh my God!" Another voice said, "He stole from his own niece." Uncle Roland looked around wildly, seeing the phones, the faces, the judgment. Pauline tricked me. She set me up. She gave you 20 years to do right by family, I said, stepping forward. 20 years of practically free land lease. All you had to do was be decent to her daughter. Instead, you called me a freeloader in front of my children. You tried to make us homeless. Ms. Blackstone pulled out one more document. Mr. Hutchins, this is a cease and desist order. You're to vacate the property manager's office immediately and turn over all keys, records, and bank accounts associated with this building. You have 24 hours to comply or will involve law enforcement. Where am I supposed to go? Uncle Roland asked, and the irony of him asking the same question I'd asked 3 days ago wasn't lost on anyone. Not my problem, I said, echoing his words back to him. Maybe this will teach you to be more like my mother. She understood that family isn't just a word people use when they want something for free. It's a responsibility, a trust, and you broke both. Ms. Blackstone added, "We'll be pursuing full restitution for the stolen rent money. I suggest you contact your lawyer immediately." Uncle Roland stood there for a moment, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fact that he'd just lost everything in front of the same audience he'd tried to humiliate me in front of. "This isn't over," he said weakly. "Yes, it is," Ms. Blackstone replied. "Your sister made sure of that. She spent her last years ensuring that when you inevitably showed your true nature, her daughter would be protected. She knew you'd eventually try to hurt Francine. She just made sure that when you did, you'd be standing on ground that was never yours to stand on." Uncle Roland turned and walked toward his car, every step filmed by dozens of phones. Mr. Crawford followed, already on his phone with what sounded like Crimson's legal department. The word fraud carried clearly across the courtyard. As his car pulled away, Mrs. Gutierrez started clapping. Then Mr. Patterson joined. Soon the entire courtyard was applauding, and I stood there, overwhelmed, realizing that my mother had orchestrated all of this. Every detail, every moment, every revelation designed to happen exactly as it had. 2 months later, the twins and I moved into the building's penthouse, the same one Uncle Roland had been living in. I didn't kick him out to be cruel. He left on his own after the investigation into his embezzlement started making headlines. Local property manager accused of stealing $432,000 from own niece doesn't look good on anyone's resume. The penthouse was everything our little Unit 4B wasn't. 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen with an island bigger than our old dining table. But what the twins loved most was the wraparound terrace, with views of the entire neighborhood. We could see their school, the park where they played soccer, even the dental office where I used to work. Yes, used to. With the building's rental income finally flowing to its rightful owner, I could afford to make a change I'd dreamed about for years. I enrolled in dental school, not to be an assistant or a hygienist, but to become Dr. Francine Moretti, DDS. The twins loved telling everyone their mom was going to be a real dentist. I kept all the tenants and actually lowered their rent to fair market value. The first time I announced this at a building meeting, Mrs. Gutierrez actually cried. "Your mother would be so proud, mija," she said, hugging me tight. "You could have raised the rents, made more money, but you chose kindness." Mr. Patterson, who'd been paying nearly $2,000 for his 1 bedroom, saw his rent drop to $1,200. "I can afford my heart medication and groceries now," he told me, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you understand what that means to an old man on Social Security?" I understood because I'd been there, choosing between groceries and gas, deciding which bill could wait another week, checking my bank balance before buying the twins new shoes. Poverty isn't just about money. It's about the constant math, the endless calculations, the weight of every single dollar. The building became something different after Uncle Roland left. We started a community garden on the roof. The Rodriguez brothers taught skateboarding to the younger kids in the courtyard. Miss Chen opened her apartment for Chinese cooking classes every Saturday. We weren't just tenants anymore. We were neighbors in the truest sense. The legal situation with Uncle Roland dragged on for months. He tried to claim that Mom had tricked him, that the contract was signed under false pretenses. His lawyer argued entrapment, coercion, even elder abuse, suggesting Mom hadn't been in her right mind during her cancer treatment. Ms. Blackstone destroyed every argument with documentation. Mom had been seeing lawyers and accountants for 3 years before her death, all of whom testified to her mental clarity. She'd kept recordings of conversations with Roland where he bragged about his business success and mocked her financial situation. She'd saved every email where he'd belittled her, called her a failure, said she'd never amount to anything. "Your mother built an airtight case," Ms. Blackstone told me after one particularly brutal court session. She knew exactly what she was doing. The criminal fraud charges against Uncle Roland were eventually dropped in exchange for full restitution. He had to sell his house, his boat, and his precious Lexus to pay back the stolen rent money. The last time I saw him, he was loading boxes into a rusty Honda, moving to a small apartment in Indiana where his son lived. He looked at me across the parking lot, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been regret, or maybe just self-pity. It's hard to tell with people like Uncle Roland. They see themselves as victims even when they're holding the knife. "I was just trying to run a business," he said. "No," I replied. "You were trying to destroy your sister's daughter to feel powerful. There's a difference." The twins and I planted a real garden on the penthouse terrace. Not just tomatoes in paint buckets, but raised beds with vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Josie planted sunflowers that grew taller than she was. Colby grew pumpkins that we carved for Halloween. We invited all the kids in the building to help, and soon our terrace was the unofficial community center. One evening, while the twins were doing homework and I was studying for my anatomy exam, Josie asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Mom, why did Grandma let Uncle Roland be mean to her all those years if she owned the land?" I put down my textbook and really thought about it. Sometimes, baby, the greatest power is in patience. Grandma knew Uncle Roland would show his true colors eventually. She couldn't change who he was, but she could protect us from him. "Like a superhero?" Colby asked, looking up from his math worksheet. "Like a superhero who fought with papers instead of punches." I laughed. Grandma knew that real strength isn't about being loud or mean or controlling people. It's about being smart, patient, and protecting the people you love. "Is that why you didn't make Uncle Roland homeless?" Josie asked. "Even though he tried to make us homeless?" "Exactly," I said. "We don't become better people by copying the worst behavior we see. We become better by choosing to be kind even when we have the power to be cruel." Ms. Blackstone had given me one final envelope from Mom after everything was settled. Inside was a letter I'll treasure forever. "My dearest Franny, if you're reading this, then everything worked out as I planned. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive, but Roland would have found a way to interfere if he'd known. You probably have questions about why I let him treat me poorly all those years. The truth is, I needed him to believe he'd won. I needed him to feel superior and safe, because comfortable people get sloppy, and sloppy people don't read contracts. The building is yours, but more importantly, the lesson is this. Never let anyone make you feel small for being kind. Never let anyone shame you for needing help. And always, always keep your paperwork. You are stronger than you know, smarter than you believe, and more loved than you could ever imagine. Take care of those babies. Take care of the tenants. And remember, the best revenge against cruel people isn't cruelty in return. It's success, happiness, and the knowledge that their power was always an illusion. All my love, Mom. P.S. Check the property tax records for the hardware store Roland was so proud of. I own that land too. He's been good about paying that lease, so let him keep running it. Unless he does something else cruel, then you know what to do." I laughed through my tears. Even in death, my mother had contingency plans for contingency plans. We renamed the building 6 months later. The sign installation was a community event. Everyone gathered in the courtyard as the workers unveiled the new marquee. Pauline Gardens, a community of second chances. Mrs. Gutierrez made tamales. The Rodriguez brothers performed skateboard tricks. Ms. Chen taught the kids to fold origami flowers. It was the kind of gathering my mother would have loved, full of different people coming together, sharing food and laughter. Uncle Roland's eviction notice still hangs in my kitchen, framed between Josie's honor roll certificate and Colby's soccer trophy. Not as a trophy of revenge, but as a reminder that sometimes the person calling you a freeloader is actually the one living on borrowed ground. Sometimes the papers they wave in your face become the evidence of their own downfall. And sometimes a mother's love extends beyond death, reaching through years and legal documents to protect her daughter when she needs it most. Every family has its Roland, someone who mistakes cruelty for strength, greed for success, volume for authority. They humiliate you in public, tear you down in front of your children, try to make you feel worthless and small. But if my mother taught me anything, it's that real power isn't in the loud voice or the pink eviction notice or the expensive suit. Real power is in the quiet preparation, the documented truth, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to reveal that the ground beneath a bully's feet was never really theirs at all. Real power is in teaching your children that kindness isn't weakness, that helping others isn't foolish, and that family should be a source of strength, not shame. The twins are thriving now. Josie joined the drama club and plays a mean Lady Macbeth. Colby's soccer team made it to regionals. They both helped me study for my dental exams, quizzing me with flashcards over dinner. They don't flinch anymore when someone mentions eviction or lawyers or family betrayal. They've learned that sometimes the worst moments in your life are just the setup for something better. I graduate from dental school in 3 years. Ms. Blackstone has already offered to help me set up my practice. Your mother would want you to own your own business, she said. On your own land, naturally. The building runs itself now, everyone paying their fair rent on time, everyone looking out for each other. We have movie nights in the courtyard during summer. We shovel each other's walks in winter. We're the kind of community Uncle Roland never understood, one built on mutual respect instead of power dynamics. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm studying and the twins are asleep, I swear I can feel my mother's presence. Not in a ghostly way, but in the security of owning our home, in the respect of our neighbors, in the knowledge that she saw all of this coming and made sure we'd be okay. Uncle Roland thought he was the smart one, the successful one, the one who understood how the world really worked. But my mother, the quiet bookkeeper with her boxes of worthless papers, understood something he never did. She understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or properties or the ability to humiliate family members in public. True wealth is in the love you leave behind, the protection you provide even after you're gone, and the absolute certainty that no one can ever call your daughter a freeloader when she's standing on ground you secured for her with patience, planning, and a 20-year-old contract that nobody else bothered to read. Thank you for watching this story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had a family member try to tear you down only to discover you were stronger than they thought, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that patience and paperwork can be more powerful than cruelty and loud voices. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about families, justice, and the unexpected ways that love protects us, even from beyond the grave. Comment below if you've ever had your own Uncle Roland and how you dealt with them. Remember, you're never as powerless as they want you to believe. Sometimes you're actually the landlord and you don't even know it yet.